The day the rancher refused to stop began like any other dust-blown morning on the edge of town, with the sun dragging itself over the red hills and the wind combing the prairie grass into whispering lines that seemed to point accusing fingers at the settlement below. And no one, not the shopkeepers unlocking their doors, not the preacher rehearsing his sermon, not even the sheriff oiling his badge, could have guessed that by nightfall the town would be a different place, raw and divided and trembling with a madness born of fear and long-simmering guilt, all because a man named Caleb Harlan kept doing a thing everyone agreed was forbidden. Caleb was a rancher of the old kind, broad-shouldered and quiet, a man who spoke more to animals than to people, whose ranch sat just beyond the creek where the law thinned out and custom ruled, stronger than any written code. And for years he had been tolerated rather than welcomed, respected for his work ethic and mistrusted for his refusal to bow his head when the town bowed theirs. And the forbidden thing, though never named, outright in polite company, was something everyone felt in their bones, something tied to an old promise the town had made to itself after a tragedy long ago, a line they swore no one would cross again. It involved the land beyond the old cottonwoods, the burial ground no one visited, the water that flowed beneath it, and the people who had once lived there before the town decided. Forgetting was easier than remembering, and when Caleb began riding out there at dawn, digging and building and bringing water back to his ranch, murmurs spread like sparks in dry hay, because the rule was clear even if it was unwritten. No one touches that ground. No one draws from that water. No one disturbs what was buried along with the town's shame. She was the first to confront him, standing in the road as his horse slowed, dust settling around her boots, her voice trembling not with weakness, but with a desperate authority that came from knowing she spoke for many. And when she cried, "Please stop doing that forbidden thing," it wasn't a whisper or a threat, but a plea, as if she believed there was still time to turn back the clock, still a chance to keep the past from clawing its way into the present. And Caleb listened, really listened, his eyes dark and steady beneath the brim of his hat, and then he shook his head once, slow and final, and said nothing and rode on. Her name was Eliza Moore, the schoolteacher, the one who taught the town's children what history the town allowed to be taught, who erased chapters with careful smiles and replaced them with dates that felt safer. And when she stood there watching Caleb ride away, she felt something crack inside her, because she knew exactly what he was doing and why, and she also knew why the town could not allow it. And yet the part of her that still believed truth mattered, more than peace, wanted to follow him, to beg him to explain himself, to understand how a single man could stand against a rule everyone else obeyed, out of habit if not conviction. By noon the story had spread, twisted and sharpened, and by the time it reached the saloon it had become something uglier, something louder. Men slamming glasses and swearing that Harlan thought himself above the town, women whispering that disturbing the ground would bring curses, children repeating half-heard warnings like nursery rhymes, and the sheriff caught between enforcing a law that did not exist and calming, a crowd that demanded action, promised to have a talk with the rancher, though even he wasn't sure what. Words could stop a man who didn't believe in the town's ghosts. Caleb, meanwhile, worked under the open sky, hands blistered and bleeding as he set posts and dug channels, the water cold and clear against his skin, and with every shovel of earth he uncovered fragments of the past the town had tried to bury, a rusted buckle, a bead carved with care, a bone smoothed by time, and each discovery hardened his resolve rather than shaking it, because this land, this water, did not belong to the town alone, no matter how loudly they claimed it. And the forbidden thing he was doing was not born of defiance for its own sake, but of a promise he had made to a dying man years earlier, a promise to return what was taken, to let the water flow where it once flowed, to mark the ground so it would no longer be erased by silence. When the sheriff finally arrived, boots heavy with hesitation, Caleb greeted him with a nod and kept working. And the conversation that followed was less a confrontation than a collision of two worlds, one built on rules kept alive by fear and the other on a stubborn sense of justice that refused to ask permission. And when the sheriff warned him carefully, gently, that the town would not stand for this, Caleb replied just as calmly that the town had stood for worse and called it peace. And that was when the line truly broke. because words like that cannot be unheard. And by evening, a crowd gathered at the edge of the creek, faces tight, torches flickering even before the sun had fully set, their anger fed by years of unspoken agreement that some things were better left alone. And Eliza stood among them, torn between her duty to the town and her conscience, watching Caleb work as if the noise did not exist. And when she cried again for him to stop, her voice broke, because now she could see what he was building, not a threat, not a provocation, but a marker, a path, a way back to a truth the town had buried along with its victims. And when Caleb finally turned to face them, shovel resting at his side, the silence that fell was heavier than any shout, and in that silence the town felt its own madness stirring, the realization that stopping him would require more than words, that allowing him would mean admitting what they had done. And as the first torch was raised higher, as the wind carried the smell of smoke and old earth, it became clear that this was no longer about one man or one forbidden act, but about whether a town could survive the truth it had tried so hard to forget. And if you feel the weight of this moment, if you want to know what happens when fear meets justice and a single choice ignites a community, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because this story is only beginning, and the madness that follows will test every soul in ways none of them are ready for. The night after Caleb refused to stop doing the forbidden thing, the town teetered on the edge of chaos, the air thick with dust, smoke, and whispers that carried like wildfire through the narrow streets. And by the time the sun sank behind the western hills, shadows stretched long across porches and alleys, twisting familiar shapes into something unrecognizable, something that seemed to mirror the fear crawling through every heart. For Caleb Harlan, quiet and unyielding, had become more than a man to them. He was a symbol, a challenge, a reckoning. And as the torches flared along the creek where he worked, the townspeople gathered, a mix of outrage and fascination shining in their eyes. Men with hands on revolvers, women clutching shawls to their chests, children peeking from behind doors, all of them holding their breath as the rancher dug deeper, laid the markers and traced the old water channels, his every movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. The forbidden act he performed, not born from malice but from a stubborn commitment to a promise that no one but he seemed to remember. Eliza Moore, torn between her role as the town's conscience and her growing admiration for the courage he displayed, stood closer than most, her heart pounding, her voice hoarse from pleading. And when she finally ran to him, torchlight flickering across her determined face, she shouted once more, "Caleb, please, think of the town. Think of what will happen if they find you here." But he only shook his head, dark eyes meeting hers. And for a moment the world felt suspended between fear and hope, because Caleb's silence spoke louder than any argument, louder than the cries of every neighbor and the clatter of horses shuffling nervously at the edges of the crowd. The sheriff, now a man forced to navigate the impossible, stepped forward, hands raised, trying to reason with a calm he didn't feel, warning that the town would not endure this desecration. That law or no law, people would rise and take matters into their own hands. And yet Caleb's reply, steady and unwavering, reminded them all that some debts are owed not to men but to memory itself, that promises made in the shadow of loss are worth more than any comfort or fear. And as he lifted another post, set it firmly in the earth, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of soil and cedar and something old and sacred that seemed to seep from the ground itself, and the crowd felt it, the weight of history pressing down on them, their anger mingling with awe, because in that act of defiance, Caleb reminded them of what they had buried, of the stories they had silenced, of the guilt they had disguised as peace. Tempers flared, voices rose, some shouting for him to be stopped, others whispering that he was right, that the town's foundation rested on lies as well as timber. And in the chaos, a man pushed forward, a neighbor with a shotgun trembling in his grip, ready to end what he could not understand, only for Caleb to step toward him, calm as the river that once flowed freely beneath their feet, and place a hand gently on the weapon, lowering it without force, without threat, teaching restraint in the only way he could. And the moment hung between them like a fragile bridge over a roaring canyon, for the crowd had never seen courage so quiet, so deliberate, and it confused them, made them question their own certainty. And that uncertainty, more than any sword or threat, sparked the first cracks in the town's anger. As hours passed, some fled, unwilling to watch a man, unafraid of the ghosts they had all lived alongside. Others remained, mesmerized by Caleb's work, watching as the creek channels were restored, markers placed, the water beginning to flow again where it had been long dammed by fear and silence, and the realization settled in like frost. The forbidden thing he did was not evil, not spite, not rebellion for its own sake. It was restoration. Reclamation, truth made visible, and with each passing hour, the madness that had threatened to consume the town shifted, became less about vengeance and more about reckoning, forcing them to confront what they had allowed to fester for decades. Eliza, her hands trembling, finally spoke aloud what everyone had been thinking, that sometimes defiance is not destruction but salvation, that sometimes the courage to act alone is the only thing standing between a town and the weight of its own shame. And when Caleb looked at her, nodded once, the faintest smile touching his lips, the crowd felt it too, and a quiet began to settle, tentative, uncertain, yet stronger than fear. For in that silence was the acknowledgement that the town might survive this. That truth, though frightening, could coexist with life. And in the fading light, as Caleb mounted his horse to leave the newly restored creek behind, the people followed at a distance, watching, learning, understanding in a way that would change them forever. And though the night was still alive with the tension of what had passed, a promise lingered in the air, carried on the wind, that one person's courage can awaken the conscience of many, that defiance, when righteous, can teach even the most stubborn town to remember what truly matters. And if you felt the weight of Caleb's choice, the power of standing for what is right against impossible odds, make sure you subscribe to this channel to witness every moment of this story, because in the next chapter of life on the edge of the prairie, the town will continue to grapple with the consequences, and every soul in it will be tested in ways they never imagined, proving that sometimes the forbidden is only forbidden until someone dares to set it free.